So Danielle, I love that you described placekeeping as a part of what you're passionate about and a part of this work that you do, because that is a segue to an announcement we have in February 7th. We have a webinar, first of the year coming up. It is on placemaking and placekeeping. So we're going to have CJ from Friends of Congress Square Park and Amy and Abby. I always get confused. I'm like, wait, it's another Abby, right? Yes. Not Abby Leibowitz here with us today, but both Amy and Abby from Discover Downtown Westbrook. And the three of them are going to do one of our quick 45-minute learning opportunities as a webinar on placemaking, placekeeping. So that's coming right up a month from a few days ago. Registration's about to go live, or did it already, Perry?
It's live and the link is in the chat.
Oh, look at that. She's on top of it. So we'll make sure y'all get more information about it, but a great learning opportunity for your design committee or any volunteers that are passionate about that, or for your board to, you can always, board could watch it as a whole. You can always register for it if you want to receive the recording later. And what other announcements do we have? Oh, that was my big one.
LOAs and invoices are out. Thank you to those who have signed them. A reminder that reinvestment statistics are also due for our main streets at the end of the month. Lots of due dates at once, which apologies.
And final or affiliate reporting on 2024 also due end of the month as well. Yeah, cool. All righty. So we will hand it over to Danielle, and then after Danielle's presentation, there will be time for question and answers, and then we will open it up for some more casual conversation with questions that you all have or things you want to share. But without further ado, Danielle, we'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here and walk through a couple of slides that I have for you all. So for those, I see some familiar faces in this virtual room here, so that's exciting. And for those who've seen this dog and pony show before, it'll look similar, but I do have some ways that we're going to think about this, specifically thinking about downtowns and Main Street, Maine communities. So like I said, my name is Danielle Moriarty, and I am Program Director at the Maine Arts Commission. Thank you for sharing your morning with me. I'm going to provide a little information about some cultural projects that can enhance livability, economic development, and social connection. And I'll kick things off a little bit by telling you guys about the Maine Arts Commission, for those of you who may not know about us and what we do. And then I'll talk about a grant that we're offering that will support all of this great work. And like Sylvie said, there'll be some time for questions at the end. All right, so the Maine Arts Commission is your state arts agency. We are funded through Maine State Legislature and the National Endowment for the Arts. In 2013, we released a 5-year strategic plan, and really got boiled down to these 4 concentrated efforts. One is serving and elevating the creative sector in Maine, connecting our communities, working on ways that we can increase funding and initiatives for supporting the arts in Maine and arts ecosystems, and then advancing Maine's communities through arts for a more resilient future. So here's just a quick snapshot of some of the programs that we do. We're really focusing on things like arts and health. We have a Arts in the Capital program where we showcase emerging and established artists throughout the state. Craft and traditional arts apprenticeship programs. The Maine Poet Laureate gets organized and funded through our office. Percent for Art, Poetry Out Loud. So lots of great stuff that we're doing. I want to talk a little bit about the Maine arts and culture sector. So in 2022, it was a $2.2 billion industry. And if you don't know, that is more than double the lobster industry in Maine. So obviously lobsters are associated with Maine, but oftentimes we don't talk about the arts and culture. Maine is really, really rich with artists and creatives and makers that are existing all throughout the state. And I think that's something that's really important to spotlight and highlight as a cultural identity of Maine. moving on here. This is just the one thing that, I'm originally from Massachusetts, so sorry, but I have deep roots in Maine. And one thing that's really unique about Maine is that it is a really big state with a small population spread out, very rural, second most rural state in the country. So this is just some stats from the NGA's report in 2019 about the rural prosperity through the arts and creative sector. I can send links to this stuff if you guys are interested in diving down the rabbit hole. So rural counties that are home to performing arts organizations experience population growth 3 times higher than rural counties that lacked performing arts institutions. They also had incomes up to $6,000 higher. And 2 out of 3 rural businesses report that arts and entertainment are important for attracting and retaining workers. These are things that I think most of us all know, but sometimes even for me, just seeing this stuff in black and white is really helpful reminder about how transformative and important arts are, not just to our well-being and our sense of community and place and belonging, which are very important, but also just the bottom line. So those are just some things to remember. When I talked a little bit about our strategic plan and that, really fun fact that arts and culture sector contributes to the GDP more than double the fishing industry and lobster industry, I pulled out this quote from Governor Mills, who this was part of an introduction to our strategic plan. So I have it here and I'll just read it really quickly. But when people think of Maine, they think of forestry, farming, fishing, all those really wonderful things that make up our identity here in Maine. But it really is the writers, the artists, the makers and performers who really enhance our sense of community. And I think that that's so true. And it's really important that we continue to support those people who make this place such a wonderful, wonderful sense of community all across the state. So I want to touch a little bit about art as a part of the 4-point approach. So oftentimes when you think about the arts and the 4 points of the Main Street approach, people automatically think of the promotion and design, which makes total sense. And this commonly looks like creating Main Street programs that engage in events and include temporal cultural experiences or beautification with art. All very good. But it's important to also remember that the arts are essential for the organization and economic vitality points as well. And in order to strengthen the role of arts in these types of efforts, I would urge you to bring these types of questions to your board, to your committee and your staff and any strategic planning meetings you have. So thinking about if artists and arts professionals are actively engaged in your committees. Are you using participatory art to collect community input, to collect data? And are there grant opportunities? Yes, and I will get to that in just a moment. What partnerships are you looking at? So these are all things to consider. And then the last question, are you paying artists fairly? This is something that I think has been in the works for many, many years nationally about how we compensate artists. I think there was a myth at one point that artists were happy to do work for free exposure. And I think that really we need to start looking at artists as professionals, and that shift has absolutely been happening over the years, but we want to make sure that it continues to happen. If you are interested in understanding a little bit about how to pay artists fairly, there's a great tool called Wage for Work, which will help you determine appropriate rates for your contractors. And I can share a link to that later on, but it's basically just wageforwork.com. And it'll help you figure out what is a fair compensation for contractual creative workers. All right, so now what you're all really here for is understanding a little bit more about our grant opportunity. So this is a new program for the Maine Arts Commission, and its goal is really to support arts and cultural activities that really serve Maine communities and Maine residents. It's for community-driven, arts-based projects to promote livability, economic development, community connectedness, all the things that I had just been leading up to here in this conversation. We really want to make sure too that there's a demonstrated impact on those communities. And sometimes that's really hard to do with a grant that has limited funding like this one does, but we really want this to be an opportunity for people to start thinking about how can we make an impact on people's lives? How can we create connection, economic vitality through the arts and how do we measure that and really show that? So like I said, here are a couple of the grant goals. So we have this defined out in these bullet points to really help people craft their grant proposal and to be linking it back to these goals, which are all in the grant guidelines. And the nitty gritty here, the nuts and bolts. So this grant opens on February 12th, but the guidelines are all posted online now. So you can take a look and start thinking about how you might want to utilize the grant. It closes March 19th. And this is for projects that will be funded for our fiscal year FY26, which starts July 1st, and it'll go through June 30th, 2026. So the funding is for up to $7,000. There is a match required. It's a one-to-one match, but this doesn't need to be cash match. It can be in-kind donations, contributions. I'm always happy to strategize with folks if they feel like that might be a barrier on ways that you might be able to do that. I know downtown organizations and Main Street Maine organizations rely heavily on volunteers, and that's something that you can use as part of your match. Those volunteer hours, if you quantify them into X dollars per hour, you can use that as part of your grant match. I often get the question of what is an example of a good creative communities project? And I'm always hesitant to answer because I really want it to be something that people are thinking about specifically for the unique identity of their community. However, people still want an answer because that's a non-answer. So really thinking about stuff that so many people are already doing, Arts in the Park series of temporary public art installations, public, concerts in the park, activating vacant lots, vacant storefronts with cultural experiences, asphalt art, street art, murals, and then cultural festivals, place-based music and cultural festivals are all kind of good examples, but it's also important to remember that there are many, many possibilities outside of that list, and really thinking about what is specific to you and your community and what's meaningful to the people that live there, and how can you use arts and culture for that. So the nice thing about this grant is this is the one grant that the Maine Arts Commission has that is available to non-arts entities. So this is open to any 501c3 K through 12 school, municipalities, tribal entities. You do not have to be an arts organization to apply for this grant. And the real only thing is that your project needs to be arts focused. And so, like I said, this is for projects happening July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. And let's see here. So here's some resources. One, for those who might have a great idea in mind or want to do something, but need a creative artistic partner, Creative Ground is a great resource. So this is a partnership program that we have with the National Foundation of the Arts, where it's a directory of all things arts and culture related within the state, within the region of New England. And you can hone it down to your specific community. There's a great interactive map where you can kind of search, I live in Bath, so I can look up all the creatives that have profiles on Creative Ground in Bath. I can look, mid-coast, I can look the whole state. So that's a great resource if you're looking for artists and creatives to partner with, but you're not really sure who those people are in your community. If they have a profile on Creative Ground, they will show up. Sign up for our newsletter. We're always pushing out opportunities and events through our agency's monthly newsletter. And then we also have a public art and creative placemaking and placekeeping resource page on our website. I'll get a link to that to you guys as well. But that has some national best efforts and tips and tools and best practices for when you want to get started working on this stuff and you're not really sure where to go. There's some good roadmaps there. And the Maine Arts Commission, moving forward, we have some plans in 2025 where we're going to create some more tailored roadmaps that are specific to Maine and Maine communities. So more to come on that. And then our grants management system, this is where you apply for funding for us. Register once, you can apply for funding all year. So that is a resource as well. And I want to just end here. So this is a quote from Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson, who is the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. And her background is actually in urban planning. And I think this really encapsulates well what we're talking about when we talk about creative communities, because it really describes a collaborative cross-sector that brings together all different agencies, from community, government, education, private sector. This is all working together to create value and generate economic, social, and cultural spillovers. So at their most powerful, arts and culture do not exist in a silo, separate from all other dimensions of our society. We are able to unleash their power when we position the arts in all facets of our daily lives, communities, towns, and cities. So that's really at the heart of what this grant is about. And so I will pause here and I stop sharing my screen and chitter chattering so that if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Thanks so much, Danielle. I love how you really rooted it in the 4 points, talking our language. Delilah's got a question.
Good morning.
Morning, Delilah.
To unpin something, but there we go. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm excited. We have a collective of arts organizations that want to apply for that this year. And I don't know if you had any comments just to help us kind of learn a little bit more why funders make a really clear distinction between an arts organization and a not arts organization. Um, all of us here, host many music related events, art walks, have a committee focused on art. And Heart of Biddeford is just now adding a whole new aspect called Art of Biddeford. And we're kind of figuring out the granting part. And so do you know anything about why it's so important that there's a distinction between arts organizations and organizations that only do art 51% of the time or some number? No.
Yeah, well, I can talk a little bit about why that is at the Maine Arts Commission. So we only have 2 grants for organizations. One of them is this one, and one is our operating support. And because we are heavily funded through the NEA, we have to meet certain requirements in order to continue to receive funding from the NEA. So we cannot fund organizations for operating support through NEA funds if you are not an arts organization. So that's kind of why that is. So this grant actually evolved from our organization project grant, which has always been open to any 501c3 or municipality, tribal, and same exact requirements that I just listed here. But we were not getting a lot of applications from non-arts 501c3s. And we evolved that application into the Creative Communities Grant for a number of reasons. It more aligned with the priorities in our strategic plan. And we wanted people to be thinking a little bit more broadly that this is a grant for your community and for the community that you serve as much as it is for your organization, because your organization is part of that community. And so we really wanted to shift the perspective and the framework of a community-based grant that isn't necessarily for arts organizations, because I think people were stuck in that track and that mindset, and really wanted to make sure that people were understanding that our organization project grant through the Maine Arts Commission isn't for arts organizations, it's for any organization. And so we're really trying to shift that messaging with this grant. But the distinction between our operating support grant and this grant is really our hands are tied with the NEA, and we want to make sure that we're also really designating arts funding that the taxpayers are funding for arts organizations in terms of the operating stuff. But for projects that are enlivening and enriching our community through the arts is open to anyone. I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does. We've gotten this grant in its previous form before for like music in the park. And I know nobody wants arts organizations that were formed for that sole purpose to die away. So they need to be able to have grants specifically for them besides the federal requirement that you're talking
Yeah.
about. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What other questions for Danielle do y'all have? Anything when you start thinking of this grant opportunity in your community? I know some of you have participated already.
I'm also happy to like just call me, email me if you're, letting this sink in and you want to talk about it later. I'm always happy to be that resource. The staff of the Maine Arts Commission does not make the funding decisions. We have a group of peer reviewed panelists who make those funding decisions. So I'm always happy to look at grants ahead of time, look at grant drafts and say, this is what I can't tip the scales, but I can say this is what I think the panelists might be looking for, just based on past history. So I'm always happy to help with that. And we will have two kind of general grant Q&A sessions. They're about all of our grants, not just this one, next week, Monday at 4 and Wednesday at noon. And that information should be going out by hopefully today. And I can always send the links as well for that. But again, always happy to answer questions if folks want to think more about it. And I know questions sometimes pop up later on.
Thanks, Danielle. Now, last call for any questions if you've got something percolating now. And otherwise, we will share this recording, the slides, and Danielle, your contact information as well in that wrap-up email. I just popped the link to the Creative Communities Grant program she was describing in the chat. And great. Oh, Delilah, do you have another question or is that up from before? Okay, great. Okay,
I'll say
well, Danielle.
One last thing,
please.
and then I will leave you.
Great.
So I will say, we do have very limited funding for this grant. I wish we could have so much more because I think there needs to be more funding in this, and hopefully there will be more for our next cycle. But I really do encourage you to partner and to think about partnerships in your community. Oftentimes I think, especially we've seen through the Maine Arts Commission, is we see a lot of organizations that are fighting for the same piece of the pie. And we have just way more asks than we can give. Each year it gets harder and harder for us to kind of maintain the percentage of folks that we want to fund. So I do advocate to partner with folks who have a similar idea, who have a similar goal, and figure out ways that you can strengthen applications through partnerships and collaborations. So I'll just leave it at that. But thank you so much for letting me take some time this morning. And please do reach out if there's anything I can help with or if you have any questions.
Great, Danielle, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And hope you have a good Friday and a good weekend.
Yeah, likewise.
All right, we'll all stay on, and from here we can stop the recording. We're going to get into the practice of recording our